Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
Simple questions for 100 people. Welcome to the experiment. I'm Bill Correll, and this is my investigation. I'm researching to gather data from 100 beautiful human beings for the sole purpose to see what actually happens across the interviews. Now, the questions are fixed and all the interviews will remain consistent, the variable being the actual participants themselves and their answers. So, Matt, it's as if I'm having you come sit on my porch to share your thoughts so I can learn about people.
Okay.
We're looking forward to what we're going to learn when we're done with this whole thing, but mostly we're interested in the people, the process, and in your particular story. So with all that said, what is your full name?
It's Matthew Gezequel.
Do you have a middle initial or a middle name?
Yeah, it's Carl.
Carl. Okay, great. Carl with a K?
Yes.
That's a great
German
name. So tell
side.
me a little bit about your last name.
It's Gezequel. We're let's see, families from Paris, France. Originally, many moons ago. But it's originally from France, and came from Paris, France into northern Canada, and then ended up in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and then my grandfather ended up in Alpena. And I also have a part of my family that apparently is down in New Orleans area.
Wow.
So apparently Bayou side of the family, which didn't even know they even existed, to be honest with you, up until a few years ago by doing genealogy. So
it sounds like you were part of the original Canuck migration from Canada. You come down here, huh?
Well, a little bit. Literally, the family came from part of the family settled in Sault Ste. Marie. The other part came into Michigan,
right.
And literally passed through Canada on the way in. But that's kind of the way it came across, and so kind of a different point of view, but most of them, or I shouldn't say most, there's a few that are there. There's a few still in France. There's a few, like I said, a couple other spots all over. So we just kind of listen and go from there. So,
have you met any of the French people?
I've messaged back and forth with one, I believe, would be a cousin who's a doctor over in Paris. And that was just messaging back and forth a little bit. Basically was like, kind of, hey, I got a message the one day over Facebook of, so I think we're related. And I went, well, with the spelling of the last name, it kind of makes it look that way.
Absolutely. You have a very distinctive name. You're my first. You're my second. Your wife was my first. Yeah. So I have a rather uncommon name also, but it's getting more common all the time. Correll. And then there are lots of variations of that.
Yep.
So what's your favorite nickname, Matt, that most people don't know?
Well, I guess it would go back a long, long time. For a long time, or for a while, my father and a couple of his friends called me Matador. And my dad said it was because basically I'm still the smallest of the four boys that my father had.
Yeah.
6'3", 260. I'm the little one. Okay.
Yeah.
And he basically used to sit there, and I'm the youngest by 5 years. And so they were all bigger, all older than me. And he said it was always, he basically would compare me to a matador trying to face down three bulls. And, you know, he always sat there and he goes, you know, most matadors would have ran, and you continued to face the problem. So he used to basically tell me I was stubborn as a bull and sometimes meaner than the bull.
So you had what you needed to be a matador. Yep. That's pretty cool. So we'll move into the next question, which is, when did you first notice what color hair you had?
Well, I want to say that it would have been probably about 4 or 5 years old. And it happened to actually because my hair changed color. My hair had a little bit of a red tinge to it. As a matter of fact, according to looking at my first haircut, my hair was red, which my grandmother's nickname had been Red because she had like a deep auburn color hair.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's kind of one of those weird things when you look back and go, hold on, this definitely is not red. You know, and it was just kind of unique to realize, you know, I have this darker colored hair and my hair's different than all of my brothers as well. They all have like kinky curlier hair, and theirs was almost jet black all the time, and then mine kind of stayed a little lighter brown. So just interesting.
Yeah, it is. And being the youngest of 4, no sisters, right? Just all boys?
No. Yeah, no. My dad's favorite comment to us was, especially like when Jen started coming around and he realized how serious things were with Jen and I. Mm-hmm. He used to turn to me and go, you know, I remember him making this statement because I told him the one day, I'm like, you know, her dad made a comment about, you know, if I ever hurt her, he'd kill me. And my dad looked at me and goes, you don't have to worry about that, Matt. By the time Gerard got out here, you'd already be in a hole.
Yeah.
I looked at him like, what? He goes, that's my daughter. I got 4 of you. I can lose one. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
I'm like, Jesus.
Yeah. That's one of those father-son conversations that I think a lot of us have been through.
Yep.
We'll take you, but we really love Jen.
Yep.
Perfect. So what's your favorite thing to do to intentionally waste time?
Honestly, cooking. Just to sit down and go out on the grill, cook on the grill, cook in the kitchen. Even sometimes bake. I'm not a big baker, but there's times where it's just, I just lose myself in the cooking and can enjoy myself.
Yeah.
The kids used to laugh at me because every time I'd be cooking, I'd be whistling and laughing and singing, and they're like, the hell are you doing? So it's kind of one of my favorite things sometimes is just to, on my day off, I'll just go out and start the smoker and cook all day long. So
all right. So tell me about your favorite things to cook and or smoke.
Let's see. I love ribs. I've gotten to the point now.
What's your favorite? Like baby back?
Actually, I like all of them. Honestly, I like to try different things. So when Jen and I've traveled, I have a tendency to try and pick a barbecue place at every stop we make. So I tend to, when we were in Texas, I love trying the Texas barbecue with it is, you know, pretty strict on just salt, pepper, and that's all there was to it. And then the same type of thing for the, when we went through Kansas City, trying certain things there. Yep. I like, you know, and I'm the guy that I make my own barbecue sauce. I have 3 different varieties of barbecue sauce. I make, my own spice rubs for everything. But like I said, I will do just about, I can't say I have one thing I love more than others. Other than, like I said, I like doing pork ribs, spare ribs mainly.
Yep.
Jen likes the baby backs, so I tend to do those. And then those I've gotten to the point, like, when I start a round of baby backs, I'm tied up for 4 hours. So,
Yeah.
so that's the fun part of the day.
So you and I could talk about barbecuing and cooking in particular for hours.
Yes.
Let us just decide that we'll do that at another time, because there's lots to be explored here. That's for sure.
Yes, there is.
So you and I, if somebody asked us about cooking, we wouldn't necessarily think that was intentionally wasting time. It's just something doing what we love, right?
Yeah. Well, and it isn't, I shouldn't say wasting time. It's a way for me to pass the time.
Yes.
And it's also my way of sharing what I grew up with my kids. And,
Yep.
And it's funny because I love bold flavor. And, my father was my dad was a truck driver. So from the time I was 4, actually, I guess my first time in a semi I was 2, till I was 14, which is when he got hurt and he had to stop truck driving.
Yep.
For those 12 years, he and I would all summer, I would go all over the country with my dad.
Yeah.
And he would be, and it was so funny because I love my mother. She was a good cook, but she didn't use a lot of spices and flavorings. And she'd say, well, that's because your dad doesn't like, that type of food. But every time we went out, my dad would find the places that had just huge flavor.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, and finally at one point I looked back and went, I just think Mom doesn't like it.
You may be onto something there.
Yeah. So that was a fun part of the day.
See, I find with people that really like to cook, they like all of it. They like shopping for the food and being really discriminatory about exactly what they're getting and how much fat's on it. Because, if you're going to slow cook something, fat's not going to bother you at all. It's going to render off.
Nope.
Low and slow, and then it'll go, right? So,
yeah, the longer the better.
And then the knife work and the preparation, and if you're going to put it in and marinate for a while or overnight or something like that, it's just steps in the process,
Oh yeah. Well, that's the same thing. Jen turned to me the one day, and the kids, or my son, literally just turned to me and went. We went down and tried place down near him, and he turned around and goes, "This is probably the closest thing to your chicken wings and your chicken tenders you used to make when we were on family vacations."
Wow.
He's like, "These are probably the closest thing to it," and and I'm like, okay, it was it was pretty dang close to what I do.
Yeah.
And he turned around and he goes, but you just literally I watched you. Because you turned around, walked in the one day and went, okay, here's some buttermilk, here's some this, and boom, and then fried it. And he goes, he always tells me, he goes, there's times where I just look back and go, okay. and that's his comparison when it comes to chicken wings, chicken tenders, and that type of things. He goes, I compare it back to your cooking. And I sat there and I'm like, okay, I'll take that as a compliment. So,
Yeah, you set a standard, no question about it. Yeah. And now you can tell him the truth. It's magic.
Yeah. Well, and, actually with him, I think he's cut off the same block, because he's the same kid that will walk in and, before him, I would have looked at sushi and walked away. and never
Right.
tried it. He's the one who talked me into trying sushi and going, hey, this isn't bad. And then finding out actually it's delicious. And so, he actually was a little more adventurous than Jen and I.
Yeah.
And that kind of led us to being what we do. So, and now it's every time we go someplace, we're looking for something different. So
It's
kind
awesome.
of fun. Yep.
Yeah. See, there's lots of different ways to see the world, but from the inside or the outside of a restaurant or a gidunk or a food truck or something like that, not a bad way to go. It's all experience, isn't it?
Every bit of it. Every bit.
So this will be an interesting one for you, Matt. I think. What's your favorite movie to watch alone?
This is gonna sound stupid, but as far as I shouldn't say alone, because honestly, there's nothing I like to sit there and just watch by myself.
Okay.
When Lex was around, it would have been some type of comedy but scary movie type thing. Because that was her.
Yeah.
One of my favorite movies, which is going to sound stupid, is the movie SWAT. Not because, and everybody's like, well, that's because you're a cop. Well, no. Actually, it's the training and everything that's behind that.
Yep.
And understanding that, it's called it's SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics, but 90% of it's the tactics, not the weapons.
Right.
And that's the part that I found interesting. And looking at some of the things they did in the movie, and then, with my background, I've been a police officer going on 26 years. So I've got, I'm a firearms instructor, taser instructor, defensive tactics, use of force, pretty much any type of force training. Yes. I'm an instructor in it. And so to look back and look at the movie and go, oh, they did that shit right. Yeah. Instead of most movies where you look and go, oh, that is absolutely not how it works.
Right. Exactly. The yeah rights per minute is what it comes down to sometimes, right?
Yeah. So that's one of those shows that I still look back and every once in a while, if it comes on, I'll sit down and watch it. And again, those are the types of things that, I would sit down and watch, and then I would find out, Christian would be hiding around the corner trying to watch, because he didn't want to let Dad know that he liked the movie too.
Yeah.
And then, just depending on the show, said that was probably one of those movies that I would sit down and watch. But, still to this day, one of the movies I would sit down and watch in a heartbeat would be, there's two, Labyrinth.
Yes.
And, oh my goodness, why did they just went under my head? Oh, Princess Bride.
Of course. Inconceivable.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you, that's fantastic. And by the way, not to step over it, thank you very much for your service. I very much appreciate what rolled off of your tongue 26 years as a cop. I appreciate you. I really do, especially these days. Thank you for your service.
No problem.
Yeah. So now that we've got the movies handled, anything with David Bowie is all right with me. And, and Mandy Patinkin's not a bad actor either. Inigo Montoya. So here's where we get into some fun, especially with somebody who's on the job. If you were to have an action figure made of you, what superpower would it have, and what color would its uniform be?
Well, uniform's going to be blue. Even though I wear blue and brown, I actually work for a couple different entities. But 26 years I've worn blue.
Yeah.
So I would stick with It would be, well, probably a combination of red, white, and blue, just to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I look back at a family history of, you know, I have three brothers that were all in three different branches of the military, which Army or Navy, Marines, and Air Force. And then my father was in the Army.
Yeah.
And then I have three uncles that were in the military and, lost one uncle in Vietnam. And so, I always honor that side because I didn't do that portion of it. And, there's times I think back going, but, I'm kind of glad the way things worked out because if I'd have done the military, I would have met Jen. So,
yeah. Yeah, things happen the way they're supposed to, don't they?
Yep.
Yeah, the other thing too is I think we find a little with a lot of first responders, 70 to 80% of them are ex-military.
Yep.
Yeah. Which
yeah, and actually,
yeah.
Yeah, it depends. Actually, around here, what we're finding is probably about between 30 and 45% are military.
Yep.
And then the rest either went to school for it or there's a couple guys that literally, I got two, I still want to call them kids because they're young enough to be my kids that literally just went through the academy and I'm looking at them like, I have a child that's older than you,
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's funny because literally I've known him since he was 7 years old. And now he's a police officer. He's 21 and he's an officer with our local sheriff's department. And, literally he and I sat down last week and he goes, do you know how many times I would sit there and ask you questions? And I said, I know. And he goes, now I find myself asking questions. He goes, but now I'm actually listening and, and trying to learn because he turned and he goes, honestly, he goes, you've got so much knowledge. And he goes, and he keeps that, he'll ask me questions. He goes, because you have just so much experience that what they give you in the academy can't compare to. So I take it as a huge honor to sit down with a couple of those guys every once in a while. So,
and I guess that would probably lead to your superpower, right?
Actually, it's going to be a weird superpower, but it's just the ability to stay calm.
Is that a power you already have?
Sometimes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes.
You'd like to probably be able to point and click a little bit more often.
Yeah, there's a few points and times where, I've literally had to walk away and go, okay, somebody better get him out of my car, because if I go to get him out, he's going to go through the window. Or there's been a few times where I've literally just turned to him and I walk him in, I put him in the jail, I look at him, I'm like, here's all your paperwork, sign, and I'm going to walk out the door. You can hand the cuffs out after you get them off. I don't care. I'm just walking away because I don't need to hear his mouth anymore. And they'll look at me and they're like, it's funny because some of the corrections officers are like, gotcha. But also the one corrections officer goes, we've heard, you've brought in people that are screaming, hollering, and you're just like, and then they're like, apparently they pushed the wrong button because you're ready to throw them at us. So,
you've got the calm state, but your mileage may vary, right?
Depending on the day. Yes.
I gotcha. So now, what did you want to grow up to be when you were 5 years old?
Oh, in a way, I think I did. That'd been my dad. That was, my dad was the guy that he could do damn near anything. And, when you look, a guy who graduates high school, doesn't know he has a full ride scholarship to University of Michigan.
Yeah.
Joins the military, got into West Point, and then got kicked out of West Point because he wore glasses. Because at that time you couldn't have glasses and be a part of West Point. And then his job in the military was building Nike missile bases. So he would literally build a nuclear missile site. One day, 4 days later, they'd tear it down and move it to a different spot. And he went all over the country and sometimes out of the country to do that while he was in the military.
Yeah.
And you just sit there and look back and go, okay, there's got to be something there. And, he was also the same guy that would sit down and I'd watch him, the Harry Potter books, when those came out, he read the books in 2 or 3 days. And the only other person I know that read them that fast was my son. And book's done. And, I would sit there and look at them both going, how? Because, when I read the book, it took me, 10 days. But just the way they were and how they both are, that's fly through it and remember almost every word. And, that just always impressed me. And, to have a guy who, worked on, and that was the other thing I always laughed at, because some of my friends would look at me and go, if my dad's something, I just look at him like, have you ever looked at the size of my father? The guy's 6 feet tall, he's 345 pounds. And yeah, he's got a little bit of a beer belly, but there ain't no beer in there because he don't drink beer.
Right.
But his arms are as big as my legs. And, I laughed because I seen a picture of my father when he was in high school. His senior picture, this guy was 5'8" and 138 pounds.
Wow.
When he went into the military, still 5'8", 138 pounds. Comes out of the military, he's 6 feet tall, he's 265 pounds, absolutely ripped like a beast. And his first job was at Pontiac Motors. And his job was picking up the V8 engine block off of one conveyor, carrying it 20 yards to the next one, and did that for 8 hours a day. And if my father and the one other guy that could do it weren't on that shift, the line shut down.
Wow.
And so I sat there, I'm like, and then my dad would tell the stories of, here he is, he was walked into work in Pontiac Motors by the Black Panthers, because that was back in '68 during the riots.
Yep.
And he would get walked. My mother would drive him, stop 5 blocks away from Pontiac assembly line.
Yep.
Plant, stop. My father would meet up with the Black Panthers and, 8 or 10 other employees, yep. And they would walk my father, and my father was the only white guy walking in on the midnight shift. And he turned around, he's like, and the guys told him, they're like, yeah, no. He goes, these guys are going to walk you in every night to make sure you make it into work, because if you're not here, we don't make money. Right. And so, and I always laughed at that, because here's my dad, good sized guy, and he always sat there, he's like, it's the weirdest thing. And, and I always laughed because I'd turn to him and somebody would say, well, didn't that feel strange? And my dad would go, no. And you'd look at him and they'd be like, well, but my dad goes, they were all my friends.
Yes.
And I always laugh because people would look at us, and I still have that said to me a lot of, oh, you're a cop, so you're a racist. And I'll look at him like, I didn't even know your skin was a different color. I'll give you one story, because I still think this is probably one of the funniest things that ever happened on traffic stop with me. I had a car I pulled over for our drug unit, calls and says, hey, you need to stop this car. We're pretty sure they just made a drug pass, blah, 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 and made a buy off of these people. And I'm like, oh, Christ. So I pull this car over, and it's an older Suburban. The plate on it comes back to it was a Pontiac or a Chevy Impala. And I'm like, well, pretty much not an Impala. And this is during the middle of COVID time, right? So there's this whole big rigmarole about wrong plates and everything else. And so I go up, and there's 6 guys in this car, and they're all African American, and they're all shaking. And I'm like, I come up and I talk to the one, and he's like, the driver, he's like, yeah, I got a driver's license, but I left it in the car. I left it in my pants. It's at the hotel, and blah, 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 blah. And he's the only one that actually had a driver's license of the 6 people in the car. Yep. And I'm like, okay. So I'm going through and I'm getting everybody's information, and I'm like, okay, guys, this is why we're stopped. One, because of the plate and this and this. And I said, now, somebody told me you guys made a hand pass with somebody else. Looked like you passed money for drugs. And the guy goes, and the one guy in the back seat goes, I bought weed. And I'm like, is that all you bought? Yeah. I said, you sure? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, I don't care about weed. It's Michigan. The law just changed. Weed's legal. I said, is that all that's in the car? And they're like, well, yeah. I said, are you sure? And they're like, and the one guy stopped. I'm like, okay. And the other guy started looking at him going, if you got something else, you better tell him right now. Just let's go. And they're like, no, all I got's the weed. And I'm like, okay. So we get them all out. I search the car, and I find, a couple, I think it's like 4 or 5 cigarettes of marijuana right underneath that guy where he was seated at. He gave me one, but he put the other 4 underneath the seat, like I wasn't going to find it. And I'm like, dude, I don't care. So I walk back, I hand him his weed. I'm like, were those yours? Okay, here, put them in your pocket. I don't care. And, I pulled them all out, and I searched them, and I handcuffed each one. And I'm like, guys, I only got 5 pair, and there's 6 of you. So, and I looked at 2 of them. I'm like, do me a favor, and, I literally hooked 2 of them around my bumper, handcuffed to each other. And I'm like, I don't think you're going to drag them through the bumper. Okay. So we're talking, and I come back and I unhandcuff them all, and I'm putting them all back in the car, and we go back up to the car. And as I'm handing the information back, and I'm like, okay, here's your license. Here's your license. All right, here's yours. Here's the, and I'm like, explain to me the plate on the car. And the guy goes, well, I own the plate, and I just bought the car a week ago, and I'm going to transfer that plate, but I can't transfer it until, and I looked at him, I said, do me a favor. Somebody get a screwdriver, go out and take the plate off. I said, because right now you've got an improper plate, which means I can tow your vehicle. And I said, which means your plate can be impounded, the vehicle can be impounded. I said, I'm not going to do any of that stuff. And as I'm handing the guy the paperwork, he drops his license, and he goes to reach for it, and all of a sudden he just starts shaking. And he's like, I wasn't reaching for anything. I'm like, neither was I, dude. Just chill out. And he goes, and it was so funny because the guy in the back seat, all of a sudden I hear this, and this guy, and of course the guy who did it, I mean, he's probably one of the darkest guys in the car.
Sure.
And one of the other guys turns and goes, oh my God, he just turned white.
That's funny.
And I'm like, I'm glad you guys can joke about it. And they're like, no. And we're sitting there and we're laughing about it. I'm like, so I didn't reach for nothing either, dude. Don't worry about it. You're all good. And we had that conversation. And the guy looks at me and goes, you're probably the coolest officer we've ever met. And I said, do me a favor. I said, 1, drive back to the hotel, get your damn driver's license so you got it with you for the driver. And he's like, yep. I said, go back to the hotel. You're only a mile away. Go back, get your driver's license. Drive out to Saginaw, get the stuff done you guys got to get done out there. Come on back, because they're working here in town. And I said, and we'll call it good. I said, but make sure that plate's not on this vehicle any longer. I said, you guys don't need the headaches. And I said, if you've got an appointment scheduled, and he's like, well, I do, but it's not for 6.5 months. I said, okay, drive around without a license plate. I said, you got insurance on it? Yeah, okay. Have fun, man. I said, you might get stopped. I said, but it's easier for us to deal with this with you saying, hey, look here, I got I've got an appointment, I got all this scheduled. I said, I can deal with that a lot easier than that bad plate. And the guy looks at me and goes, wow. He goes, you're probably the coolest officer we ever met. I said, well, that's cool. I said, you guys have a great day, send them on their way. And about 3 days goes by, and I'm not paying attention. I have a tendency every once in a while, I'll stop and I would get Jen a Diet Coke from McDonald's, right? So just pull up and order her a Diet Coke, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, the car in front of you paid for your drink. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I look up and I see all 6 of them in the car waving out the back
window. You got a fan club now.
And I'm like, I wave. I'm like, thank you. You guys have a great day. Boom, boom, boom. Done. And I laughed because I seen them about a week later. They're in the parking lot of the hotel where they were at. I'm like, hey, how's everything going? And they're like, sweet. Oh, it's good. We're glad it's you, Answered a couple questions for them and on the way. And, it was just funny because the one guy turned around and goes, I've never dealt with a police officer who, that we didn't have problems with. Yeah. And I looked, I said, well, do me a favor. I said, your buddy here's got a warrant. Call and take care of it. I said, you're making money now. So it's $100 fine. Go pay it. And they're all like, oh, okay, cool, But it was just unique to sit there and have that conversation with them and have them look at me and go, you're not the normal police officer. And I said, never have been.
You know what? I appreciate that. And I think you and I don't know what it's like, especially around that area. My dad was raised in Detroit, in the city. Yeah. My grandparents lived about 6 blocks off of Algiers where the riots were.
Yep.
And I don't remember for sure what street they were on because they moved after that, but it was, it was downtown. And he had the same kind of stories. He was shift supervisor or superintendent at Chrysler, at an axle plant or something. And he said 90% of the people that work for me are black. He said, and they don't get away with anything.
Nope. And, and I laugh because like these guys were sitting there, and I actually just seen one of them, because one of the guys is back working for the same company. Michigan Sugar has a big sugar beet plant out by near us. And they have a substation just outside of Sandusky. And the guy's back working. And he's like, this is so neat that you're still here. And I'm like, oh yeah, dude, no big deal. And it was funny because he turned around and goes, you probably don't recognize me. I looked at him like, nope, but I recognize the Suburban.
There you go. That's one of the cool things about the line of work that you're in. You have the days that are stressful, but you also have the stories where you can have just this basic human connection with people. And, and so I'm going to ask you, what would you say your greatest accomplishment is?
Well, that would be the 2 people we raised.
Yeah.
Those 2. I mean, I look back and Lex was, she's a chip off of her mother. When you look back and realize, here's a girl who, they used to tell us they weren't volunteered, they were voluntold to do things, which they were. But they did so many different things. They helped with kids camps for underprivileged children. They helped with kids that were, Lexi spent time at the Child Advocacy Center, and then for her to go back to school and her to make a decision that, her degree was in nonprofit administration. So she wanted to do what her mother was doing.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge one. And then with Christian, I still think it was funny, but he always told us he wanted to be a pilot. And we actually have pictures. One of his senior pictures is him in a Western shirt because they had the pilot program. And he literally, when we visited Western, he turned and he's like, I'm not going to need a dorm room. I'll be living here at the airport, type thing. And we're all like, okay, that's where he's going to go. And then all of a sudden, just before the end of his senior year, he chose to go to Central Michigan. And we looked at him and I'm like, okay, why? And he looks at me and goes, well, Dad, I can go to school for 4 years at Central. He goes, they're not offering many scholarships. They're not offering this. They're not offering that. He said, after 4 years of schooling, maybe 5, because the way the program is, I could be making close to $100,000 a year, but I also have probably $150,000 in debt. I said, okay. He goes, Central's offering me a scholarship. I can go to school. I can work in IT technology. I can get my degree. Yep. I can, and then his other aspect of that was, but in order for me to make that $110,000, $120,000 a year, I'm never home. I said, okay. He goes, if I go to school for IT technology, I can make $110,000 from my basement. And I looked at him. I said, yep, you're right. And I turned and I said, now I want you to remember one key thing of how you said this. And he goes, what's that? I said, you said your basement, not my basement, your basement. and he looked, he goes, oh, I see how it's going to be. But it was a running joke. But because he literally, I remember him telling my wife, I think he was like 8 or 9. And he told her, he goes, well, I'm going to go get married. And then me and my wife are going to move in here with you guys. And I'm like, huh? No, And, because he just loved to be home, right. And he's kind of a homebody, but he's also, like I said, he's the kid that would try anything when it came to food. And, he was the challenge. He was the one that you'd sit there and go, okay. And, my daughter was easy because it's either spaghetti or it's going to be chicken tenders and French fries. That's what she ate. And then here he is going, oh no, I want sushi and I want this and I want this and I want to try, he's the kid who turned to me the one day and goes, Dad, did you see they have rattlesnake on the menu? And I looked at him like, it tastes like chicken,
Yeah.
And he looks at me and goes, how do you know? I said, Grandpa,
Yeah.
So,
haven't you seen that movie? Everything tastes like chicken. It came from the Matrix. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it was funny.
So beautiful, beautiful kids.
Yep.
And, I also want to just say I'm so sorry about your loss with Lex, because she was an extraordinary young lady. And I don't really want to cut you short or take you someplace where you really don't want to talk. But I'm real interested in who your favorite person to listen to is.
Let's see. As far as music goes, I listen from anything from Beethoven to Metallica and AC/DC.
Yep.
And I love all kinds of music. Which I still to this day am the same way. My dad used to pick on me, because my father was the guy who played, he played baritone, bass sax, treble saxophone, and he played 5 different saxophones in the clarinet when he was in high school. And then I'm the guy who I played the clarinet for a year. I got switched to tuba. And then in the middle of that, I played tuba and trombone and then baritone. And then the percussion system would play the drums during, and literally there were times during certain songs when I was in band that I would put down my tuba and go over and play the timpani and then come back and pick up my tuba in the middle of the same song.
Yeah.
And, just in general, I just love any type of music. And that's where I would sit down, and to this day, I will sit down and listen to just about anything.
Yeah.
And I really can't say I don't really have a favorite song. Well, I do, but that has more to do with Jen. So that was the song that we chose as our wedding song. So
An hour song, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I think people who are in love with each other have an hour song. If
Yep.
you're not in love with each other, they don't have hour songs for some reason.
No.
So this is great stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not sure how old you are, but please complete this sentence. When I grow up, I'd like to.
Honestly, that's changed so much. Now, my goal, and I part of my job is I go into the schools and I teach a program called TEAM, which is teaching, educating, and mentoring.
Yep.
And that's more of a passion now, in working with the kids. Because I teach programs from K all the way up through kindergarten, all the way through 12th grade. And then because of the kids, I went and got my self-defense classes, because I literally was at one school and I asked the kids, what's one thing that we've talked about or something that we didn't talk about that you think you should know? And I had 22 girls out of a 28. The senior class, the one year, the one school, there was like 28 kids, and there's only like 6 boys. And all 22 girls told me the same thing. They wanted a self-defense class. And they felt that was something they needed. And so I started researching into self-defense courses and found that there was one that I really liked, and it was something I'd been interested in had looked into several years ago for myself.
Right.
And so I started taking the classes on my own for myself. Then I found a class that actually incorporated for law enforcement, and then took the personal defense readiness course through SPEAR. And, I think just being able to impart that knowledge to these kids in all these different topics, whether it's, teaching about vaping, and I tell the kids, I said, my job is not to harp on you and tell you what bad things are going to happen to you.
Right.
I can tell you what the law is, but I also know the law doesn't matter. I said, what you need to know is how this affects you physically,
Right.
what this can do to your body. And then you can make an educated and informed decision. If this is something you want to continue doing, that's your choice. If it's something you want to, if you're already doing it and you want to quit, here's some resources on how to quit.
Yep.
And, and I tell the kids, I said, this is only a few. I got 8 here, and I'll tell them, I'm like, here, I'll pull up my phone and I've got a list of them. I said, you can take a screenshot, come up, take a picture of my phone. You've got all the information, same thing I'm giving you. And you can do what you want. I'm not going to ask you for your vape. I'm not going to ask you for your name. I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm not even going to ask for if this is for you or if it's for your, and all of them will, half of them will say, well, it's for my mom or it's for my brother or whatever. And I'm like, whatever, I don't care. But, I did the one course at the one school it was 550 kids last year at the one school. And earlier this year, I went back in there and we're scheduling up the next for me to do that same course again this upcoming year. And there were 10 kids that walked up and said, thank you. And I looked at them like, huh? And the one turned around and goes, thanks. I said, for what? He goes, your class meant a lot last year. And that's all he said. Well, then they turned to me and they said, yeah, we haven't seen him in the bathroom as much this year. So I'm like, okay. And, there was 9 other kids that said the same thing. So I'm like, so by providing education, 10 of them quit. Success.
How about that, huh?
And the principal turned to me and goes, we need you to do that again because, we've got the younger kids that are not seeing this yet. And I'm like, that's fine. So
It's important work. It really is. I mean, you're giving kids something to stand on, a little bit more confidence. If you know that you can handle yourself and can get away, which is what self-defense is all about. It's not about fighting with somebody, it's about escaping, So the interesting thing in all of that is that you've done that kind of work with people of all ages, and to do it with kids is so important. But what would you say is the most important thing in life to you right now?
Well, that came from actually my study in self-defense. We do a deep dive into fear and understanding your fears.
Yep.
And, I have one fear, and people will look at you and go, oh, the guy who teaches the class turned to me the one day and goes, oh, you're probably like everybody else. You're afraid of death. And I looked at him and I said, oh, hell, him and I don't get along. I don't care about him at all.
Yeah.
When that happens, it happens. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I said, my only fear is losing losing Christian and Jen.
Yeah.
Those are my fears. And I said, and that's something there's nothing I can do about it. But, and then I turn to him, I tell him, I'm like, that's the only fears I have. And he'll look at me and the one day he turned around and we literally sat down and we talked for probably like 45 minutes.
Right.
About fear. And he looked at me and goes, you're the first guy I'm gonna believe who said you don't fear death. And I said, no. I said, honestly, there's times I said, I've faced it so many times. And I said, and not, I said, I've, part of my job is for 25 of my 26 years, I've been a medical examiner, special investigator. So I investigate every death that takes place within my jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So, I've faced it. I've seen it. I've seen the bad side. I've seen the good side. And the one thing I learned is that the way and how I approach the living means everything more than what took place when I was dealing with the dead.
Right.
And that's where I find my side of turning to, like, this younger kid who's asking me questions in law enforcement, and I'll turn to him and the first thing I'll look at him and say is, the one thing you've got to learn is, I said, and I turned to him, I said, don't ever, I said, especially in this situation, I said, it's easy for somebody to say, I'm sorry. And I said, I said, to me, that's the worst thing you can say.
Yeah.
And he looks and goes, well, what do you mean? I said, you can look at him and go, I'm trying to understand how you feel. And, if you have some knowledge, you can say, I don't know exactly how you feel, but I have lost somebody in my past and I understand how that can affect you. I said, but use your empathy. I said, empathy will get you so much further than sympathy. And the one kid looked at me and goes, "Oh, good God." And I told him, I said, that's the hardest thing you will ever have to do.
Right.
I said, because, in law enforcement, they tell you you're not supposed to feel anything. You're supposed to be a rock. And I said, you can't be,
No.
because then you're just a dick.
Yeah, you're that guy.
And he looks at me and goes, and I turned to him and I said, and I know you. You're not a dick.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and goes, okay. And he just kind of stepped back and he's like, that's probably the best advice I've been given. And I turned to him, I'm like, so that's the one advice I can give everybody is that's the one thing you got to do is you need to be a human being. You can't be a robot.
Yeah.
And I said, and human beings use empathy, not sympathy. And he turned and he finally looked at me and goes, I really understand where you're coming from. I said, I know you do.
Yeah.
And I said, just think of what you've gone through and you've had losses and you've had things that happened.
Right.
Might not be the exact same, but if you can use compassion and empathy, you'll get so much further. And then, like I told him, I said, it's kind of like I said, when you're dealing with a suspect, I said, there are so many times where I have wanted to literally reach across the table and grab this guy and beat the hell out of him. But I also know I can't. But I also know if I can get him to think I'm his friend, I might get a confession, which might save the victim.
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at me and goes, and I said, some of the best interviews you'll ever do is when you sit there and you talk to a guy who I said, and you might have to do this. I said, I've done it to myself where I've gone in, I know I'm like walking in going, okay, he's a human being. He deserves to be treated like one. He's a human being. He deserves to be treated like one. And then after he walks out and we're done and I've got all the confession and I got all the information I needed and he's walking back and he's leaving and he's going probably 90% of the time he's going to a cell. And I'm like, okay, did my part. And as soon as I'm out of their sight, I look and I'm like punching a wall. Going,
Yeah.
Oh, that piece of shit.
Oh.
And then I told him, I said, that's the hard thing. I said, but that's what you've got to do to get your points true.
Yeah.
So
Matt, what would you like to leave in the world after you're done?
Well, I know I'm going to leave a garden,
Yes,
which
you are.
but I hope the one thing, because I challenge when I do a class on bullying, or when I did a class earlier this week where we talked about safety, and we talk about, one of the things I talk to the kids about is you have rights, and some of those rights, and we'll talk about that they have the right to be safe. They have the right to be themselves. But with that right, you also have the responsibility to allow everybody else to be themselves as well.
Right.
And we talk about that. And then I tell them, I said, I carry my challenge right here on my arm.
Yeah.
I have a tattoo that says, it's got a blue rose, and then it's got a monarch butterfly with the name Chevelle over it, and then a blue tiger or a yellow tiger swallowtail with the name Riviera underneath it, which is my two granddaughters.
Yeah.
And then it says, love, laugh, live like Lexi. And I tell the kids, I said, this is my challenge to me, and I make the same challenge to you. And they'll look at me and I go, this is the challenge. I said, Lexi was the child that no matter what age level, grade, whatever, she would go find somebody who was by themselves and go talk with them.
Yep.
And many times almost every one of those people will say she was one of my best friends. And her thing was she'd been bullied and she knew what it was like, but she also knew she didn't like it and she didn't want to put anybody else through it.
Right.
So she would and encourage them to be themselves. And so, I still say this, when I told Jen, I said, we lost Lex. I said, I gained two more sons. I said, I lost my daughter and my granddaughters, but I gained two sons. Jason, who was Lexi's best friend, and, he came out because Lexi encouraged him to be himself. And, he actually turned to Jen and I a little while ago and said, if I get married, can you guys walk me down the aisle? And I'm like, okay. And he and I talk probably, I message him through Snapchat a couple times a week and we talk back and forth. And then there's a couple times we'll talk and we might talk or text message for half hour or 45 minutes or talk. And it's funny because he'll turn and go, and he'll say the same thing because he recently, just after Lex passed, he lost his dad. And he said, he goes, it's nice knowing I have a dad still, so, and then Derek, who was Lexi's fiance, he's still a part of the family and always will be. And so, turn them like, so I went from having a son and a daughter to having three sons.
Yeah.
And, it's been a tough change, but it's still, and like I told them, I said, I'll challenge the kids and I'll have the kids look at me and go, oh my God. And I told them, I said, now the funny thing is, because they looked and the one girl goes, well, your tattoo's in the wrong order. And I said, oh, no, actually it's not. I said, the sign says live, laugh, love. And they said, well, yeah, but yours says love, laugh, live. And I said, well, that's because Lexi wanted to buy one of those signs, but she didn't want the ones that were attached. She wanted them so the words were separated because she wanted to put them love, laugh, live. And I finally looked at her. I said, okay, explain yourself. Why, what's with the change in the order? And she looked and she goes, well, they say if you live, you'll love and you'll laugh. And I said, yeah. She goes, that's not the way it goes. She goes, you love and you laugh. She goes, you got to love first. Then you're always going to laugh. And she goes, and that's when you live.
Yep.
Well, shit. Okay.
Can't argue with that logic.
Nope. So, and that's where I always say, I said, so that's why it's love, laugh, live like Lexi. And I said, that's my challenge to live to her standards. And I challenge everybody else to the same standard.
Yeah.
And when you tell that to a group of fifth graders or fourth graders, and, and someone will look at you going, and they're almost bawling. But then I've got other kids that will sit there and go, and the one kid looked at me and goes, oh my God, you guys have the garden over in Sandusky. And I said, yeah. He goes, we go there every weekend. And to hear that story and hear that, and I'm like, okay. So that's my goal, is to pass that on.
I think that is not only admirable, but it's also really great that you're able to see it in action while you're here. Yep. That's a big deal. So we're at the last question, believe it or not. And okay. I know you know about bakers. When you buy a dozen, they give you a 13th one. So I figured I'd give people a 13th question as well. 13 for the price of 12. What is the thing that most people misunderstand about you, Matt?
Well, I guess, like I said, it's a lot of it because of what I do for a living.
Right.
People, and then my size. I'm a big guy. They mistake that For some reason, everybody thinks I want to fight with everybody. And 90% of my time, I don't want to fight with anybody.
Right.
I want to talk. I want to, that's how I communicate. And I think that's the one thing I want people to understand is, yeah, you can be a big guy. And yeah, I'm going to tell you, if we get into a fight, it's probably not going to go well. And I will tell you, I don't fight fair. I mean, there's no such thing as a fair fight unless you're standing in the middle of a boxing ring or one of those MMA rings.
Right.
And even those sometimes aren't fair.
Right.
So, but there's rules. I'm sorry, when I get into a fight, there's not a rule. It's just, and the answer to me is I'm going home at night. I don't, and I told the one guy, and I remember this one guy looking at me, and I turned to him, I said, you have two choices. And he looked, he goes, what's that? I said, you can walk back in, and you can walk in, and there won't be a problem. He goes, okay. Well, what's my other choice? I said, if we go through this, you're probably going to get dragged out of here in a stretcher. And the guy looked, and I said, because I looked at the guy, I'm like, you're 6'8", you're almost 400 pounds. I'll shoot your ass. And he was like, what? And I turned to him, I'm like, and I told him that. I said, I'm not, I said, you're huge. You're built like a Mack truck. And no offense, but I said, if it comes down to it, I'll shoot you if I have to. And the guy looked, and it was so funny because up pulls this other officer, because I was literally staring down this guy by myself. And up pulls this other guy, and he runs over, and he goes over, and he hugs this other officer. He's like, he scared me. And he looks at me and goes, when the hell did I become the good guy? And he walked him back in, and we're all like, okay, And he looks and goes, how am I the nice guy for once? I'm like, I don't know. I'm the bad guy for once.
Yeah.
He always sat there and goes, you're always the nice guy. How the hell am I the nice guy? I looked at him, I said, and I told him what I said, and he goes, okay, I guess I know why you're the bad guy this time.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the one thing most people don't understand is honesty. And, if you're honest with me, I have given some huge breaks to people.
Yeah.
And I guess one of those, and I still to this day, I always laugh at it, but I'll give you one story about honesty that I always find to be one of the best ones. So myself and another officer, and he was the guy that no matter if you get pulled over by him, you're getting a ticket. Okay. That's pretty much it. And he's sitting next to me. And then if the two of us are in a car together, somebody's probably going to jail. It it always ended up that way. We'd get somebody with warrants or something, we'd get, somebody do something stupid and, somebody's going to jail that night. And so we're in a car together, and he looks and goes, and he's in the mood, he's got the ticket book in hand, and he's like, oh, this is going to be a fun night. I'm looking at him like, dude, come on. And we're driving down this side street, and all of a sudden this car blows this stop sign, literally turns the car sideways, and then this car's fishtailing, coming at us in our lane. And then fishtails back the other way, and then finally gets over on the side of the road. And there's a city park like right here. It's 25-mile-an-hour zone, and this guy's probably doing 40. And we're like, oh my God, and he just blew the stop sign. So I whip on the lights, and the guy just flips around, and he stops, and I go walking up to the car, and I look at this kid, and he's maybe 16 years old, or just turned 16, actually, just turned 16, like 3 days. And he's sitting there, and he's shaking, and he's crying, and I looked at him like, so do you know why we stopped you? And it was like the scene from Liar Liar. This kid takes this huge breath, and he goes, I was speeding. I turned the car sideways. I nearly hit you head on. I was doing this. I did this. I also blew this stop sign, and I didn't have my seatbelt on. And I looked and I'm like, okay. And I looked over the car at the other officer, like, what the hell is this? And he's like, he's standing there looking at me like, what just happened? And I turned to the kid. I said, so can you tell me what's going on? Why? He's like, I literally just got my license 3 days ago. And we're like, okay. So driving like an idiot for what reason? He's like, literally, my girlfriend just broke up with me. She lives down here, and I came from her house, and I was just upset, and I didn't know what to do, and blah blah blah. So we're sitting there, and we let him talk and cry for a minute. I'm like, okay, dude, do me a favor, just breathe, just chill and breathe for a little bit. And he's doing that, and I said, okay. So are you okay now? A little bit, and I'm like, okay, do me a favor. So I showed him how to box breathe, and I'm teaching him how to breathe. And the sergeant's standing there looking at me like, you're teaching him how to breathe? Like, he's got to calm down. So I'm like, I want you to be able to drive home, but I want you to drive home normally, not the way you were just driving. And he's like, okay. So he's breathing, and I get him calm. I said, okay, you do this for a little bit. We'll be back to talk to you in a couple minutes. And as I get back in the car, I go back and I see the sergeant sitting there with the ticket book in his hand. And he opens the little screen that goes to the back seat. And he takes the ticket book and he throws it through the back window.
Yeah.
Then he reaches down, grabs my ticket book, and throws it through the back window. And then he closes the screen and goes, now, if you can get through the screen to get into the back seat to get it, you can write him a ticket. And I looked at him like, well, I hadn't planned on writing him a ticket now. I said, I've never had anybody so honest with me in my entire life. And he goes, well, me neither. He goes, and, we've all done stupid shit when we broke up with a girlfriend and, at his age and blah, 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 blah. I understand. I'm like, yeah, we've all done stupid things.
Yep.
So we go on, and I go up and I give the kid a verbal warning, and I send him on his way. So about 5 years later, now the other officer had left our department. He's working for another department. And I'm heading to a training. And while I'm getting ready to sign up, I'm looking and I see that he's heading to the same training. So I would call him and I'm like, hey, you want to meet up and drive together? He's like, sure. I got a department car. Come on over, meet up with me, and we'll go down in our car. Okay. So we go down together, and we're in Oakland County. And we're sitting there, we're taking this class, and I think it was on auto theft or something. It was just kind of a BS class type thing. And we're kind of sitting there, and there's this kid who's staring at us. He's just staring at the two of us. Billy's like, did we beat him up or what the hell? Do you know that kid? I'm like, I said, he looks familiar, but I said, I can't put a name with it. So we're sitting there, and then he comes up to us and goes, hey, what are you guys doing for lunch? I don't know. Come on, I'll drive. You guys can come with me. Okay, whatever. So, he's from Oakland County. He's an Oakland County deputy. So we went with them, went to eat, and we're sitting there. I think we went to like Famous Dave's or something like that. So, we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, we're waiting for our checks. And we're like, I waved down I'm like, hey, we got to get our checks so we can go. And she goes, they're already paid for. What do you mean they're paid for? And she goes, he paid for them. The hell's that for? He goes, well, you guys don't remember? I said, no. He goes, and he gives us his name. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I know that last name. I know you. And he goes, how's this? I blew a stop sign. I was doing 40 miles an hour at 25. I turned the car sideways and I nearly hit you head on. Looked up like, holy shit. He's now he's now a deputy for them. And he goes, I remember what you guys did for me. And now I try and make sure I use the same treatment for other people. And he goes, and nobody believed my story that, Dwayne Gilly didn't give me a ticket.
Very, 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 very clear. I like it.
Yeah. So that's one of those ones where you just look back and go, that's something I can pass on. So,
Well, clearly you left an impression on him, and he went on to be a deputy, and I'm sure he's probably distinguished himself since then.
oh yeah, he has actually. We just actually Gilly contacted me. He goes, you won't believe it. I said, what? He goes, I just seen the kid. I said, oh, what's he doing? He goes, well, he was just at my up here at Lapeer, taking SWAT school training with me. I'm like, okay. He goes, he passed sniper school a few years ago.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, sweet.
Yeah.
And and here he is. He's taking, and he told Gilly, he goes, I remember that you were a sniper. And he goes, and I remember, everybody was always worried about the sniper and all this because you were a sniper and you were on the SWAT team. And he goes, I wanted to be like you. He goes, and then he goes, I know Gezequel's a firearms instructor, so I went and became a firearms instructor. And he goes, and Gilly turns around and goes, seriously? And he goes, yeah. He goes, he turned around, he goes, honestly, he goes, there's times where I look back and go, just meeting those two guys and talking with them and realizing you're humans and you're nice people and this and that. He goes, it's been the best thing I've ever done. And I look back and I'm like, well, I turned to Gilly the last time. And I'm like, so apparently we did one thing right.
Not bad for 26 years, eh?
Right.
Matt, thank you so much. It's been an amazing, amazing conversation, and I've learned so many questions that I've got, especially about the food. But
believe me, I understand that.
do you have any questions of me?
No, actually, Jen kind of explained everything, and I think it's an awesome idea of what you're trying to do. And we both said the same thing. We're honored that you've asked us to be a part of it. So.
Well, we've met through the Grief Network, and quite frankly, I'm more than happy to make friends with anybody who's had a loss, who can articulate, as you said earlier, that empathetic side of not knowing what it's like for other people, but sure knowing what it's like for you.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, I still think that I know, like with my group that I'm a part of with Helping Fathers Heal, that program and that book that we did, I've had people contact me from the book, and from when we were at the conference, I've had 3 or 4 people contact me. They're like, hey, do you remember? And I'm like, yeah, I remember talking with you at the conference, and I remember, going over certain parts of the book with you and that type of thing. And, I had one guy contact me, and he said, he goes, we can't do a garden at the level that you guys did.
Yeah.
And I said, nobody expects anybody to do anything. You do what you want to do to honor your person.
Yes.
And he turned and he said, I did, he fixed a, small garden that was around a, Mother Mary at the local church and he goes, it's not even a church I go to. He goes, not Catholic. He goes, it's for the Catholic Church. He goes, I drove past the one day, and he goes, my daughter's name was Mary.
Wow.
And he goes, I seen this, and he goes, it was upsetting to look at. So he went through and he cleared out the area around it, helped plan it, and helped recreate this little sitting area around the Mother Mary. And he turned around, he goes, it sounds weird. He goes, but the whole time I could hear my daughter. And I told him, like,
Yeah.
I said, he goes, and I still find myself going there once in a while. And I told him, I said, that's why I go to our garden. Literally, I said, almost every day I work, I try and take a little bit of my day, and I'll walk out to the garden. I said, whether it's middle of winter or summer or whatever, I try and walk out to the garden. I said, because I hear my girls there.
Yeah.
And I said, but I also hear them everywhere else now. And he turned around, he's like, and he told me he was, he's like, he goes, I never thought I'd do something like what I did for that little area. He goes, it's 10 foot by 10 foot. I'm like, that's huge.
Yeah.
And I looked at him, I said, so it's 10 foot by 10 foot. That's 100 feet. So, and he kind of looked at me and went, that's awesome. So,
well, Matt, you know what? As much as I'd like to just keep going on forever
I
and
know.
ever, we got to wrap for the folks at home. And, you've been very generous with all your sharing and insights and everything. And ladies and gentlemen, Matt's a little bit different breed of cat. And I think you've given us some good things to think about. With that said, I want to address one more thing to you folks at home. It's my normal request to you when we're about to sign off, and I'd like you to reach out to someone that you know, like, or love in your life and let them know that your world works because they're around, and that if they ever need you, you're always just a phone call away. You can help them with a smile, or you can go be with them if they need it, but let them know that it means a lot that you're here. So having said that, Matt, I want to thank you again for being on. You did a great job with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, we are Simple Questions for 100 People. I'm Bill Correll, and thank you very much for your participation and listening. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Simple Questions for 100 People, part of the Xvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode of Simple Questions, plus the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.